from the neuroscience perspective, contra what you learned in Economics 101, the neuroscience predicts and the data support that people who are working in environments in which they feel like they're really flourishing in a broad sense, professionally, personally, and even spiritually, whatever that means, they're just killing it. They love it. They enjoy their jobs a lot. It's not that happy employees are more productive, it's that productive employees are happy. And so if I can use insights from neuroscience and or measurement so that I can help these employees be more productive, we're in this win-win space where the organization obviously benefits, but the individual benefits by just feeling like, oh man, I killed it today.
Welcome to the Work for Humans podcast. This is Dart Lindsley. Paul Zak has been on a quest for more than 2 decades to understand the neuroscience of human connection, human happiness, and effective teamwork. From the Pentagon to the Fortune 500 to the rainforests of Papua New Guinea, Paul's research has now led him to found Immersion Neuroscience, the first company to track and measure real-time immersion experiences. His latest book, Immersion, uses 50,000 brain measurements to show readers how to create high-impact marketing, entertainment, training, customer experiences, and employee experiences. Paul is an acclaimed professor, speaker, and a neuroscientist who's ranked in the top 3% of most cited scientists worldwide. During his career, he started the interdisciplinary fields of neuroeconomics, neuromanagement, and neuromarketing. Paul has written 3 general audience books and is a 5-time TED speaker with over 2 million views, and has spoken to audiences across 30 countries, including recent talks at NATO Supreme Headquarters, Google, Facebook, and Harvard. In this episode, Paul and I talk about what it means to be immersed in your work experience, the role of oxytocin in creating trust, empathy, and care at work, and the aspects of neuromanagement. We also discuss work as a social emotional hub, 2 things you need to create extraordinary experience, the research behind effective advertising, the connection between autonomy, mastery, and job satisfaction, scientific reasons why dogs are better than cats, and other topics. If you enjoyed today's insights, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss out on a future episode. All right, I'm thrilled to present my discussion with Dr. Paul Zak. Paul Zak, welcome to Work for Humans.
Thank you so much, Dart.
This show is about the experience of work. And I will tell you, there have been times when we've touched on the neurochemistry of work in this show. But I'm always a little hesitant to do it because I think that when you're doing product design or designing things, that how the brain processes things can be a long way away from it. It can feel like it's a hard place to start a design problem, when you're thinking about that. But what you have done is completely different, which is that you've taken an incredibly experimental approach to understanding what kinds of experiences result in what kinds of effects in the mind or in the brain. And so you've just published the book Immersion. And I want to start broad with the topic of immersion, the chemistry of immersion, and then we'll get to work. So what led you to writing Immersion?
The backstory was post 9/11, with the big ramp up of spending in the Department of Defense, my lab was funded to identify combinations of signals in the brain that would accurately and consistently predict what people would do after a message or an experience. So essentially, we burned millions of dollars of taxpayer money to equip warfighters with a new superpower called persuasion. So as you know, at least intuitively, Dart, the brain's a very lazy organ in the sense that once I've established pathways in the brain that manifest as habits, it's hard to change those. So if I'm trying to influence you in some way, your brain just wants to idle. And so incidentally, not meaning to, in trying to understand the neuroscience of persuasion, we found a network that the brain uses to value social emotional experiences. And the natural question then is, well, if this network goes crazy and you read this peak immersion experience, what does that mean? What's the manifestation of that? And how can I get more of it?
What is the biochemistry of immersion and how do you test it?
So in my lab, we always start by measuring changes in neurochemicals. So the way we did this work was we said, let's give people an experience, like watch a video or see some information, and then see if they respond in an observable way. So again, I'm a prediction guy. I'm not a feelings guy. So some people respond, and some people didn't. So we take blood before and after and say, for responders, what was the neurochemical change? Because the anatomy of those neurochemicals is known, then we can optimize data collection for areas that have receptors for those neurochemicals. And so we measured about 140 signals in the brain simultaneously, both in the brain and the peripheral nervous system. And what we found was that to have an extraordinary experience, two primary things have to happen in this valuation network. One is you've got to be present, right? If I'm distracted doing something, I'm not going to have a great experience with you because I'm distracted. And the second is that experience has to be sufficiently emotionally resonant with me. It's got to actually generate an emotional response that goes, oh, this is important. So if I'm present and I'm getting this emotional connection, if you will, from that experience, that's a continuous variable. I can get more or less of that. Then that's how the brain values experiences. So once we did that in the laboratory, we convolved these multiple signals into one overall measure I called immersion, convolved them to maximize predictive accuracy. Then we talked about this before, Dart, but neuroscience is expensive and I'm a cheap bastard. So when companies start showing up with money and saying, hey, we want to create better customer experiences or better employee experiences or better marketing, and we hear you have some kind of tools, could you help us do that? So eventually we started a company that is able to pull these data for immersion from smartwatches and fitness wearables. Because the brain is embodied, we're able to trace back, using pharmaceuticals, trace back these pathways from the peripheral nervous system back to the brain. So it allows us, for the first time, to allow anybody to measure what the brain loves in real time, any place people are doing cool stuff.
Let me actually tease something out here, which is there's a stimulus to me. My brain does something with that stimulus, and then I do something as a result of that stimulus. My conscious mind may or may not be accurately interpreting that pathway. Is that accurate? In other words, if you were to ask me why I just did that thing, I might say to you, well, because I love, pineapples or whatever. But to some extent, my self-reporting is not an accurate representation.
Right. So in psychology, they make this differentiation from feelings, our conscious appraisal of our emotional states, and emotions, which are the physiologic response from that stimulus. And most of what the brain does is not ported into consciousness because it's just too expensive. Running the consciousness program, if you will, is very metabolically costly, and the brain is so energy hungry that you want to shunt that away to really efficient processing. So if I asked you what you had for breakfast 2 weeks ago, you wouldn't remember, right? Or the last bad movie you saw. I mean, who knows?
How frequently are you now able to measure the biochemistry? What level of granularity can you get in terms of understanding people's responses to experiences?
Right. That's a great question. So again, the biochemistry induces the electrical activity in the nervous system that we pick up at 1 time per second. So very, very rich experiential data. And if you think of linking that with an audio or video of that experience, then you've got a time series that tells you, hey, here's the parts of this experience that were fabulous and the parts that weren't. So let me give you a concrete example, because now we're still at 30,000 feet. I'm working with a high-end restaurant chain, and they asked me secretly to go to one of their restaurants and have a meal. I took my young adult daughter with me because I had an open check, and we had wearables on, and we measured the entire hour and a half experience, and did that a bunch of times and some with their competitors to gain some insights into what really I valued the most and what fell flat. So again, I could give you my opinion, and expert in consumer experiences. I'm sure I have a lot of experience I might be able to draw from, but this is objective and comparable across individuals. And so, yeah, it was to be able to look at it and go, okay, things are great here. And then around 1 hour mark, things really start to go south. And because I have a recording of what happened, I can actually tell you what the experience was. I don't have to remember, here's the stuff that didn't happen at that time that should have happened at a $200 lunch.
You've often described oxytocin as having a relationship to trust, as a relationship to pro-social behavior, as having a relationship to caring and empathy, and also just feelings. And to some extent, I wonder whether our language is capable of handling what oxytocin does, or if it's doing all of those things, like it's doing a complex of things in our brains.
Yeah, that's a good neuroscience question. So I want to be clear that in the published scientific literature out of my lab, we were the first to show that when someone trusts you, your brain releases oxytocin. We've done oxytocin administration experiments so we can causally increase prosocial behaviors. But oxytocin does not work on its own. And in this work we did for the Department of Defense and other agencies that might have three letters, we looked at a whole set of interactive factors in these neurochemical factors. So there's not a one-to-one mapping for anything in the brain, except for one couple little,
Oh, it's interesting that there's anything, actually.
Yeah, almost nothing, but other than just really deep stuff that has to keep you alive. That's not going to be, you don't want to have too much conditionality on breathing and heart rate and stuff. You have a real tight balance on that.
There's all these words when you describe what oxytocin does. There's a whole set of words that you use to describe it. And those words are prosocial behavior, that it helps with trust, that it helps with caring and empathy, that it has effects on feeling in general. Either it's doing something very complicated, or we have very complicated language that makes it hard to describe what it does. I'm trying to make a connection between those words and what's actually doing.
I can't answer the question because the premise is not right. So all those words are things we've shown in experiments published in the peer-reviewed literature that oxytocin is associated with increased empathy, more generosity, greater prosocial behaviors, being trustworthy. So those are quantifiable in an experimental setting. But you're right, when we use casual language, we can think of oxytocin as this part of this valuation network for social emotional experiences. So as social creatures, we are hyper aware of anything that has social or emotional components because they help us survive, at least evolutionarily, and even today. And so if you think of the movie Wall-E, remember that little Pixar movie with that little robot? We just anthropomorphize that, right? So, people cry at the end of that movie, oh my gosh, Wall-E went to space or something. So, we're hyper aware, and part of that hyper awareness is this massive receptors for oxytocin in the frontal cortex. So what that means is that we are just unconsciously picking up all these signals from people and from things around us, like human-like robots, that help us navigate through the world. In particular, allow us, getting back to work, how about this? Allow us very naturally to congregate with a bunch of people we're not genetically related to and work on a joint project. So that is super unusual for any animal, with the exception of ants and bees. They're all genetically related. Right? You stick a bunch of chimpanzees who don't know each other. If they're from different troops, they will literally try to kill each other. But we actually rarely do that. Murder is awful, but it's actually very rare in most areas of the world. And so I think the first takeaway for work is it's not at all strange to have a bunch of people who, at least initially, don't know each other, put them in a building and have them work on projects to help the entire organization. That's very natural for social creatures like humans.
And it is deeply related to oxytocin.
Correct. And the actions of oxytocin in this larger network.
What does it feel like to take oxytocin? Can you feel it? Or is it something that affects your behavior without you feeling it?
Great question. I've done about 700 oxytocin administration studies on humans, 0 adverse effects. So probably more than anybody's ever done. So we've done studies on, for example, on graduate students in my lab who know all about the effects. And so you might think they could sort of figure out. We gave them drug or placebo. Even those expert graduate students couldn't tell if they were on oxytocin or not. So there is a small relaxation response. So this is some deep neuroscience for you, Dart. But there's an area in the brainstem that controls yawning, and there's receptors for oxytocin right next to it. And so a tip off that I've learned over so many infusions of oxytocin is that people actually will yawn a bit more when they're given oxytocin. But it's just kind of relaxing. Like I see you, my brain releases oxytocin. I'm like, oh, that's Dart. He's a great guy. I can relax. Where I see some other stranger, I should be a little more alert, right? I don't know who this person is. And so I think of that sort of relaxation response makes me a little bit more empathic, a little more sensitive to your social state or your emotional state. Therefore, I'm a better social creature.
That's fascinating.
So no high associated with it, sadly. People, sometimes I get drug seekers coming to my lab.
Yeah. But I think it's an important thing because it's something that happens quite quietly from a phenomenological perspective. In other words, I don't necessarily perceive it happening except in secondary effects potentially. It's really interesting. So let's talk about the application. And one of the main applications that you've used it for is understanding the effects of advertising. So not just how people are going to self-report they felt about an ad, but actually which ads are going to have an effect and are going to affect behavior. So what have you learned in doing that about what actually is immersive? And now we're going to start talking about the word immersive as it pertains to ads being immersive.
As a term of art for a neurologic state, right? That's kind of the easiest ball to hit. Most advertising doesn't work. We don't really know why. We ask people if they like something. That seems to be the dumbest question ever. What I want to know is, does this ad shake up your brain so much you go, holy crap, I got to buy this thing, or I got to find out more about it, or whatever that is. So from the book, we measured over 50,000 brains now from immersion. So got a ton of data, so we can really draw general insights. The most effective way to sustain immersion and therefore influence behavior is to use a narrative arc, full stop. Now, interestingly, everyone knows this is not surprising, but now we can measure it objectively. Does that narrative arc really produce this high immersion effect where I go, oh, this is really important to me? So immersion is metabolically costly. It says, this is important. I'm going to put a bunch of resources into processing this. So again, that means the narrative's got to be relevant to me. It's got to be well structured. And we have found, because of the high correlation between immersion and information recall weeks later, if the call to action or branding moment is at an immersion peak, it's going to be more effective in moving markets. So again, just to be super practical here, in recent scientifically published research, we're able to predict hit songs 3 months in advance with 97% accuracy. These are songs that were sent to us by a streaming service. They said, hey, 3 months, we'll send you number of plays and downloads and additions to playlists and all that. And the data are super predictive because they capture that, oh, I really care about this thing. And yeah, if you ask in the study, we asked them, do you like the song? Do you think it's going to be a hit? Would you share it? Zero predictive ability on that conscious self-report, which itself is really interesting, right? We sort of think we know ourselves, but in a very real sense, we don't.
Yeah, and you've done the same thing for movie trailers and which ones are predictive of people going to see the movie. And one of the most shocking things you said is that you were able to do it, I can't remember whether it was with songs or whether it was with the movie trailers, in essentially the first 3 seconds of a trailer.
Isn't it shocking? Yeah, maybe in the first 10 seconds, but the brain kind of knows if it's good or not. And that just seems wrong. But we've done that so many times. And again, now we have people using the software. So it's not like I have to sit in my lab running these experiments. I have people every day doing studies. And it's really interesting that somehow your brain knows very early on if the experience is going to be great. So I think for experienced designers, for leaders of organizations, kind of like what your mom told you, you don't have a second chance to make a first impression. Start out strong, right? It really helps.
And some of the things you say about narrative, which I will just call out, is first of all, stories work. Story product congruence is important. What is that?
So having seen now hundreds or maybe thousands of ads with immersion data, I'll find some really interesting ones that are nice stories and they drop in the company's logo. And, if you show these to marketers, they will just guff-gaw, in a conference. Because if I'm telling you a story, then I want to link that emotional state to that brand. If they're disconnected, then it's just weird. But if the story or the product is part of that story, then it makes perfect sense. Then I remember that story. So again, strong correlation between information recall and immersion. So that story goes into memory. And now when I go in the store and I see something I like, I go, oh yeah, and not consciously. I go, oh yeah, whatever these are, icebreakers. So I'm holding up mints, and I have a nice story about how those mints led to people to fall in love. And I saw this on an ad on YouTube, whatever. And then I have this nice feeling when I see those mints that I like. So again, if I don't have that product story congruence, it's just a nice story that my brain will flush out, like the breakfast you had 2 weeks ago. It's maybe pleasant at the time, but it's not meaningful.
Right. And the story you told was of an ad called Empty Chair for Guinness. And you told the story, which I will tell briefly, which is there's a woman who works as probably a bartender. And every day she puts out a Guinness and by an empty chair. And every day people come to sit in that chair and she says, no, don't sit in that chair. That chair is waiting for somebody. The person doesn't show up. And then one day a soldier is walking to the bar and he's tired and she's tired and he walks in and he sits down at the empty chair to have the beer that he deserves from his service. And she just nods. It's not a love affair. That doesn't sound like what it is. But Guinness is right there at the center of a narrative, a really deep narrative. And you said that as you were writing it, you teared up. And I was like, damn it. As I was reading it, I was tearing up. And I'm like, damn it. Like, I've been used, right, by an ad.
Right.
But it absolutely is effective.
And the end of the ad, the people in the bar see the soldier and they lift their glasses of Guinness, of course,
Guinness again.
and salute him. So it's very aspirational. Don't you want to be one of those people who supports these rare individuals who sacrifice their energy, their time, and sometimes their lives to keep us safe and free? I'm getting chills now just talking about it.
I do too.
For listeners, you can YouTube it. After this is over, go YouTube Empty Chair Guinness. It's beautiful. And yet, as I talk in the book, so BBDO is the ad agency for Guinness and longtime subscriber to our software. They didn't use our software to test those ads, by the way. That was before we worked with them. But they've done some kind of dud ads for Guinness that were just, again, kind of stories to drop in the Guinness logo. They have nothing to do with Guinness beer. So that product story congruence in my brain melds that goosebumps emotional experience with the product. As I said in the book, I rarely drink Guinness, but every once in a while I do. And it certainly keeps it top of mind. And I think for most marketing, that's enough, right? I just want to make sure this is top of mind. So if I happen to walk into there's an English pub in the little city I live in. If I happen to walk in there, I'll probably get a Guinness, right? Because it's an English pub and what are you going to get? I guess they're Irish, really, beer. But anyway.
Yeah. No, that's right. There's something very special about reaction videos that have the same physiological effect, at least on me, which is that when I watch reaction videos of Game of Thrones and I see groups of people all responding to a particular scene in Game of Thrones, it makes me cry. And you've said that faces are important. Is there a correlation there? Seeing others' reactions?
Oh, absolutely. So immersion is contagious. So I see you having an emotional reaction. I tend to have that reaction, both positive and negative. People laugh much more in movie theaters with a group of people than they do watching a movie alone. It's kind of a social response. Same thing with crying. But you also see this in what's called medicine hysterical responses. So this happens in schools when your kids are little. I'm sure this happened to them, where one kid's at lunch in the lunchroom and the kid throws up because kids throw up all the time, right? And then a bunch of kids start throwing up, right? From an evolutionary perspective, that's super smart. You're all eating the same food and that food might be bad. Yeah, just get rid of it. You can miss a meal. It's not going to hurt you, right? So yeah, we're super sensitive to that social information, but it's so uncomfortable, isn't it, Dart, where I'm just going through my life and all of a sudden I'm crying and people are around me. I'm like, oh my God, what's wrong with me?
It was the Clint Eastwood movie that you were watching on an airplane that made you cry out loud. $1 Million Baby.
$1 Million Baby.
$1 Million Baby.
Embarrassingly. Yeah. But that tells us that we're so sensitive to social information, and that I've certainly made an argument in some of my previous books. That's what generates so much good behavior among humans. That if I hurt you and I share your emotions, at least partially, I don't really want to hurt you. If you're in pain, I'm going to feel pain, right? And so that's part of this underlying biology of moral behavior, right? Or pro-social behavior. I'm okay with either word. But again, it also means, I'm going to bring it back to work, Dart, even though you don't want to.
No, I'm going to bring it back to work too.
It means at work that by and large, when you see bad behavior at work by employees, what we have found in lots of experiments, including experiments with criminal psychopaths, is it's usually good people having bad days. So that is, they have an intact social emotional connection system. They're producing all these neurochemicals. They want to cooperate, but high levels of stress, for example, or lack of sleep, all these factors will inhibit our ability to process those social emotional experiences. And therefore, it manifests as me being a jerk at work. So I think from a leadership perspective, what I've learned from all this work is to be really, really tolerant of the variation in human behavior that individuals themselves are not necessarily aware of. Like my kid's up all night with the flu. I haven't slept more than 3 hours. I'm going into work and I'm just not a very nice person, but I don't know that. I'm just going through my day. But then the people around me go, God, the guy's such a jerk. So I think it's really incumbent on us not to make the real important error known as the fundamental attribution error. So that is, I've seen you for years and years. I see your work and you're always great. And then today you walk in and you're just behaving badly. I don't know why. I'm like, oh, that Dart's a bad person. I'm attributing that behavior to your personality rather than your current physiologic state. And we found is that for 95% of the thousands of people we've measured, bad behavior is almost always due to bad physiology, tired, hungry, sick, been on your feet for 14 hours. We all have been through that. In fact, we know that when you're more than 25 years old and you, I don't know, lash out at somebody, then the next day you got to go into your colleague or your secretary and go, I got to apologize to you. I was having a bad day yesterday and I yelled at you and I never should have. I was just, my cat died or got in a car accident. And people understand that. Oh, yeah, people have bad days. But sometimes from a leadership perspective, we go, no, there are personality traits. And as I said, we've measured people with those personalities, those are psychopaths, and they lack this architecture. So they will say, now we're back to self-report, they will say, oh, I am so concerned about people who suffer and little children, but physiologically, they don't have this dopamine, oxytocin response. They don't really feel empathy. I mean, it's on a continuum, but they don't have the architecture to really feel empathy that healthy people do. So that's about 2% of the population. So it means 2% of the people you hire, you got to cut them loose right away. And the other couple of percent who are having bad days, that's a conversation. Hey, Dart, you've been in here all week. Are you all right? Because I'm really concerned about you. You always are a great colleague. And that just seems like, and you say, yeah, fortunately, I'm getting divorced. And I thought I left it at home, but I guess I'm bringing it to work. And I would say, okay, great. Let's have a talk about that. Can you take a week off? Are your projects moving forward? For me, as a leader, I would much rather have you take some time off, get yourself focused, resolve whatever issue you have, rather than show up, have presentism working for us. It doesn't help anybody.
You've coined the term neuromanagement. What does that mean?
There's neuromanagement 1.0 and 2.0. So 1.0 is using general insights from neuroscience to be a more effective leader of individuals, how we organize those people. And so that's people like recognition, people value autonomy. Those are general principles. I think neuromanagement 2.0 is measurement, direct measurement, for example, using wearables or other technologies that allow not only leaders, but individuals to begin to optimize their work life. So there's this interesting convolving of happiness at work and productivity. And a lot of work, including at Harvard Business School, has shown that employees are actually happy when they're productive. It's not that happy employees are more productive, it's that productive employees are happy. And so if I can use insights from neuroscience and or measurement so that I can help these employees be more productive, we're in this win-win space where the organization obviously benefits, but the individual benefits by just feeling like, oh man, I killed it today. And you know how you feel that way at work, right, Dart? You know, your spouse asks you something, you're like, man, I just was flat out today and got a ton done. And you're like, okay, I can have that beer or sit in the hot tub or whatever you do to celebrate. Like, okay, I earned it. I put a hard day's work in.
In ads, we are interested in averages. We're more interested in averages, I suspect, in ads. I'm trying to win a big market. And so I want to know what most of the market wants. Or at least you've said, I want to know what the super fans want because they're the ones who are going to promote what it is to others. Are averages a good way to understand people, or do we need to look at specifics?
Man, I love that question. I'm going to say yes and. So the average question would be, is my culture an effective place for people to flourish, broadly understood? Are they productive? Are they getting promotions? Are they satisfied with their jobs? Are my sick days moderate? Increases in any of those factors are not great. So that's the first level. And then to do that effectively, if I have more than one department or location, I can compare the Mountain View office with the San Diego office and say, hey, I can get on average how effectively people are thriving at work. doing a survey using neuroscience measurement techniques, whatever that is. And then I can say, hey, the people in San Diego seem to be killing it. What's different there than in my Mountain View office, right? That would be an interesting question about averages. I think the and part of that is for a given location, which individuals are really feeling like they are that most satisfied employee who experience joy at work. One of the interesting side notes here is that from the neuroscience perspective, contra what you learned in Economics 101, the neuroscience predicts and the data support that people who are working in environments in which they feel like they're really flourishing in the broad sense, professionally, personally, and even spiritually, whatever that means, they're just killing it. They love it. They enjoy their jobs a lot. Where in Economics 101, it's like labor provides dish utility. Work sucks. I got to pay you and monitor you. But if I can create an environment where you can really flourish, you have autonomy, you're getting feedback, you're feeling good about whatever you're doing, you're helping your colleagues and customers, a rock and roll kind of culture. That's to me a measurement issue. And I'm not saying neuroscience is the only way to measure that, but just for listeners, we've used this one question, joy at work. How much do you enjoy your job from 1 to 7? That's actually a pretty darn good indicator of culture.
I use a lot of self-reported data on what people want from work. You actually say there's a phrase you use here. So, a little background. A lot of the framing that I'm using is that work is a product that companies sell to employees. So, we can use product development tools, product design tools, to design it better so that people engage with it. And you've said something really interesting, which is that the traditional view is that businesses exist to solve customers' problems. Okay, so I've been asking people, what problem essentially does work solve for you? What is the utilitarian thing that you get from work? Now, a lot of what they'll answer is things that I think are related to immersion, but you go on in what you say. You say the modern approach is that businesses that want long-term success need to bring joy to customers. Joy is the foundation for the experience economy. You wrote, neurologic immersion correlates with enjoyment and builds a desire to repeat the experience. And so where I'm going with this is I've found people self-reporting a very wide distribution of what they actually want from work or what they enjoy at work. And I'm trying to understand whether that's an illusion or if people really are different.
It is a funny thing, Dart, that, and certainly consistent with you and I, that somehow you get good at doing something and then you go, man, I love my job. Like I will do this 7 days a week. This is super fun. Are we just confused and delusional and just lying to ourselves, or is it really true? So what we find in the data that is measuring 10 hours a day employees at work is that there are aspects of work for most people that give them a high degree of immersion. So this enjoyment, pleasure, value in the brain. So that's subjective, right? Now, it's not all day at work, although there are some exceptions. I spoke to a woman just a couple of days ago, and she was like, so the data are normalized around 0 to 100. So she was like 98 or 97 all day for 8 hours. I'm like, either you are the most happiest person on the planet or you have the best job ever for you. So yeah, I think one question is, what parts of my job are most exciting? That's an interesting question. I may not know that, particularly if I'm a younger person. I may not know that. And so to me, this is all being the stuff we've talked about, employee-centric. There are a small group of high performers. So how do I keep those high performers working for me and not for somebody else? Give them autonomy, give them feedback, give them a chance for promotion, give them a personal life, but also give them the tools so they can begin to craft their job for the greatest satisfaction. It's one of those weird things where what you love doing, you just do better. So I've been in situations when I was younger where my boss would say, hey, Bob is out because he's sick this week and you got to do more of the accounting. I can do accounting. I don't like accounting, to be honest. I can do it. But what if I did the accounting and I had some way to measure how much I liked it? And I go, oh, holy crap, I actually love accounting. I thought I didn't like it, but I really dig it. Well, give me more accounting, right? That's going to give me more job satisfaction. I'll put more effort in. I'll be more productive. So that's the sense in which I'm using this term job crafting. Right now, we kind of do it randomly, like, hey, go work for a day in a different group and see if you like it.
But you are implying something which is supportive of what I've said, which is that different people want different things. What is going to be immersive for one person may not be immersive for another. And being sensitive to what attributes of work are immersive for one person versus another makes it possible to be more deliberate in how work is allocated.
I think it's even worse than that. It's that even my preferences may change over time. So I do talk in the book about gaining mastery at something allows essentially brain space to be creative. So I want to do that. I want to give employees a chance to really master what they're doing and then also give them the autonomy or freedom to think about now innovation, variations on that. And from a leadership perspective, it's super hard because I've hired for different positions. Sometimes we hire generalists, but generally you're hired at least to have some specialization. I'll give you a concrete example. So we don't know what we like. That's the key issue, or what turns us on, or what gives us value. A company in Mountain View that you may or may not be associated with has a friend who's a friend of mine working there. And she was mentoring a lot of people, went through their coaching program and said, holy crap, I love coaching people. She's a very technical person with a PhD. And over a course of a year, she moved to another technology company where she could mentor a lot of young women in technology, which I think is really important. So by going through this coaching program at her previous employer, she ended up quitting and getting a full-time gig, just essentially being a coach or mentor. Now, great for her as an individual, probably good for a new employer, maybe not so good for her former employer. But on the other hand, if she was doing a job in which she wasn't really feeling satisfied or motivated, she probably wasn't really doing it as well as somebody else could.
And what you said was, we don't know what we like. But actually, I think what that story told is we don't know what we're going to like.
Well put.
But when we're experiencing it, we do. We may not self-report it accurately, but we do actually recognize it.
May I ask you, Dart, what is your position on cross-training and job sharing?
My position is that everyone should have the freedom to test as many work experiences as possible so that they can find out what they like and then give them the freedom to move to it as much as possible, or move it to them, which is what's moving and what isn't moving. So my position is that work allocation needs to be mindful of what people enjoy doing. And as much as possible, you allow self-selection. But if it's not possible, you allocate it accurately with an understanding of what people self-report they like, because I don't have the neuroscience to check it.
Lovely. Let's back off on the neuroscience. I think with enough exposure of doing something, you can kind of figure it out, right? But again, I think it's hard from a leadership perspective. I filled this slot, you're good at it. Now you want to move? Oh, crap, I hate that, right? Now I got to get someone else to do this job you're at, and you want to go work for somebody else and you're a high performer. I don't want to let you do that. So again, my view is that if you're a high performer, I want to keep you in the organization. I don't want to have competition within an organization, different groups in there for those high performers. I think we should let them move around, or else, again, they'll go to a different company.
And actually, this is something about a large proportion of your work that I'm working to disrupt, actually, which is a lot of your work, because of who asks for you to do it. People are saying, look, I want to increase my box office. And so they're looking for ways to understand what is going to drive the behavior of buying tickets. If we anchor too much on productivity as the objective of what we do, then it would be acceptable if people were miserable and productive to let them be miserable if productivity is what we're after. First of all, your reframe is, well, that doesn't work. Your point is, miserable people, not productive. But the second thing is that there's a more fundamental belief, which is that value is flowing both directions. It's flowing in terms of the work people do towards a customer who's going to give us revenue. But a company should look at itself as also having another kind of value that's flowing toward employees. And there's going to be a Venn diagram in those two things that is identical, so that it's both great for customers and great for employees. But if it's great for employees, we should still do it if it's financially feasible. And so I'm always a little bit cautious about anchoring entirely on what makes people productive as opposed to what makes them joyful and flourishing. Because if we ever find evidence that it doesn't make them productive, then we don't care. It's a complicated dynamic, and I'm watching it through your work, and it's partially because of who's asking you to do the work.
We're sharing a brain for sure, Dart. So my late colleague Peter Drucker wrote in the 1960s that an organization's first responsibility is to the employees. And I think he was talking about this EX to CX mapping. So what we find in the data is that immersion's always higher when there's a social layer. So if I'm a customer facing employee and I don't dig what I do, I'm not excited about the organization I work for, I'm going to do them in. Just human nature. But if I love this place, I align with the company's values and I like what we do. I like how we improve people's lives. I'm excited about the people I work with. That's great too. All that means I'm going to give better customer service. I'll get more satisfaction, more immersion from that. As I said earlier, immersion is contagious, and the contagion is about 80%. So that the immersion I feel, say, as a customer service employee, is about 80% of what you feel as a customer. That's pretty messed up and weird. Again, it's like people crying at movies. It's neurologically very unusual. It tells us how acutely responsive we are to social information or social emotional information. So yeah, I totally agree with you. If it's reasonable and it makes the employees thrive on the broad sense, I think we should do it. This notion of the so-called tight 40, like, hey, we want you to have a personal life. When you're here, I don't want you to be goofing around. I want you to be hard on for 8 hours, and then at 5:30, I want that parking lot to be empty. So that's an interesting approach, right? Which is less of a focus on what I enjoy doing and more of a focus on satisfaction. So joy, I would say, is this more acute mood state where like, I'm having so much fun at work. This is the kind of Zappos employees. I'm sure you've been on the tour. And so I spent a lot of time at Zappos. They hire people who are just, because they're mostly in customer service and people facing stuff. So people, and they're just happy anyway. They're very agreeable. They're very sweet. They're lovely, lovely people. I don't really want you to be happy at work. I want you to be satisfied at the end of the day that I did something maybe hard, but important, right? And have that satisfaction. Now, in retrospect, I say, do you enjoy your job? Yeah, I go in and I hit it hard for 8 hours. Please push back if you disagree with me.
No, I don't disagree. There's a couple of things in there, though. One is my own team. When I said, let's talk about how much fun we're having, they said, we don't really want fun. They said, we want rewarding. They said, it's a broader term. It may include fun, but it can include unfun as long as we feel like we're kicking ass, basically. So that was there. And you said satisfaction, very similar, I think. But the second thing is 8 hours. Can we be immersed for 8 hours straight? Or do we need some fluctuation in there? Do we use up those chemicals?
We do. So the brain works on contrast. And as I said earlier, immersion is metabolically costly. So we look at these data that are always a sine wave. I have this peak immersion moment. I just closed a big deal, or I just finished this project, or I just helped this team member solve a problem. Big peak immersion moment. And there's going to be a trough, right? So what Accenture has found using our platform is that during training, corporate training, Accenture, about $14 billion in revenue company, they spend about $1 billion annually on training their employees. So they make a big investment in training. They found that in training, people cannot stay immersed for more than 20 minutes without a break in what they're doing. So let's say my training is scheduled for an hour. I might talk for 15 or 20 minutes, and then I might do table work for 15 or 20. I might, do debriefs for 15 or 20. They have found that breaks need to be longer. So if I want you to be on at work, in training, whatever this is, I've actually got to build these troughs in where you can recover. So we used to call this coffee break, but we don't do that anymore, or cigarette break. No one smokes cigarettes anymore. But I'm a big believer in every hour, hour and a half, I try to just get up and walk around the office. Just get up, let my mind wander. Don't do a phone call. Don't listen to music. I'm going to do a 5-minute chill out and just recover a little bit. If I'm working at home, I might play with my dog or get some sunshine. To me, I'm much more productive. I guess you'd have to ask my colleagues if that's true or not. But I feel like that little 5-minute refresher is kind of what I need. When we look at things in biology, there's this inverted U curve. So if I look at physiologic arousal, you might call that stress, but it's really challenge stress. Performance is much better when I have moderate stress levels. So I'm on, right? Like right now, I'm on, right? I'm putting energy in. If I was just like, whatever, Dart, or if I'm too stressed out, I'm not going to perform well. So I kind of want people to be in that sweet spot where they got goals, they got people depending on me. I know what I need to do. I hit that milestone, right? But I do think having those little troughs, as you said, are really important. How do you manage the troughs? Do you create a space for people to do that, or you sort of institute it?
That's an interesting question. I don't have enough control over how people work to answer the question. I let people work the way they want to work to get stuff done. So there's a difference between effort and time with your shoulder against the wheel and invention or creativity. And I don't know how much dead space is necessary to, I'm totally not going to talk neurologically at all because A, I'm not competent to, but how much do I need to reduce the noise in my brain before I might hear something deeper that is an insight? I don't know. And so for a team that is about laying bricks, effort and bricklaying are very correlated. But for a team that is inventing new things, I don't know. I don't control it.
I think, what is that statement? Invention comes to the prepared mind. I do think when there's a goal and yet you can mind wander, that seems to be the effective way to do it. You know, getting a great idea in the shower, which we all do. So I think instituting that in a creative industry is really important. I worked in consulting years ago, and I had a boss who, I don't know, didn't have kids or something. He'd never leave the office before 8 p.m. Never. And everyone felt compelled to stay. So what happened? People spent 2 hours during the day shopping or fooling around, and because they didn't want to leave before the boss did. And I just like, I'm a grinder, but I'll grind hard. And I started leaving at 5:30, and people were like, "Oh my God, what are you doing? Fred's still here." And I'm like, man, I hit all my milestones. I'm set up for tomorrow. I'm good to go. I'm not going to sit around and bullshit. And this guy actually owned racehorses, and people go to the races to watch his racehorse run. I'm like, I'm not interested in racehorsing. I'm sorry. I got a life. I want to go to the gym. I want to get a good meal. So the war for talent is over, and talent won a long time ago. And so I think as leaders, what we want to do is facilitate and serve those individuals who are creating so much value. And that means being flexible. And if I need a guy who, like programmers, all the dev guys I know, they're all night owls. They all like to work until 2 a.m. And I could care less. As long as when I wake up, you send me a report of what's going on, where we're at, and if you need my help, I don't care at all, right? Just get the stuff done. So if you want to solve this problem by climbing a rock or something, go for it.
Yeah, that's where I am too. It depends on the kind of work, but for the kind of work that most people I work with do, I agree. You've said something that on its face sounds contradictory in what you wrote. And it may just be a polarity, like one of those things where both are true. One is that the office serves as a social emotional hub that improves communication and teamwork. And so when it comes to creating relationship and creating trust, in-person work is important. But also, autonomy is the neurologic foundation for mastery and job satisfaction. And in that section, you were saying, and some of that autonomy means working when and where you want. And so these two things can both be true, but it also means that decision-making is not as straightforward as if only one of them were true.
I think the move towards hot desking is a good advance. We have space in the office. I would like to see people in there a couple days a week. Most places where a lot of people live, the commute is sucky. And if you look at the things that decrease satisfaction with life, number one in most surveys is commuting to work. So if I can cut out your commute at work and you can save that hour or 2 hours and put that into work or just have higher energy at work for that matter, I'm down with that. I think from a leadership perspective, it is important that we have people together as a group, probably at least once a month. I'd rather see once a week. Hey, we're all going to agree that if you look at this data on day of the week, it's Monday and Friday are the people working home the most, right? Of course. So let's all agree that Wednesday, we're all going to be in the office, if at all possible. And I, the boss, I'm going to cover lunch on Wednesdays or beer at night. I'm okay with that too. Whatever it takes to get people in the office.
And you have found that there's a neurochemical response to being in person.
Completely, yeah. And it's this kind of attachment response where now, again, it's part of that social nature. I'm just going to work harder when I have people that depend on me and I can trust and they have my back. And so those bonds are easier to build when I physically see you and hang out with you, by the way. Well, I kind of took a little shot at Zappos. I love the people at Zappos, by the way. I love them. Tony Hsieh was a friend. And Zappos does monthly block parties. They actually just cordon off a block or have the police do it. And they have food trucks and they have drinks and they have music and they go out and they hang out. So it's not at work necessarily, but it's after work. And I've been to a bunch of those, and they're really warm people generally anyway that they're hiring. But I remember going to one where I didn't pay for a meal or a drink. I was there for 3 hours and they were just buying me stuff. Oh, hey, Paul, how are you? I remember seeing you earlier. Let me get you a beer. I'm like, wow, these people are lovely. So imagine for someone they hardly know me, they're doing that. They're going to do that for their friends too. And that reciprocity is the foundation for friendship. And people can be friends at work, right? I mean, this was a verboten kind of subject 20, 25 years ago. Don't be friends with people at work. There's a work you. No, it's just you. You can be friends with people.
I liked what you said about dogs at work. Dogs at work increase cooperation and happiness. And guess what? Cats don't.
Just data, guys.
It's just data. We're not saying anything
experiment.
bad about cats, except that they don't increase cooperation and happiness. That's what we're saying.
Yeah, dogs are great stress reducers and will just bring joy to your life. So yeah, for listeners, if you Google my name in the BBC, we actually ran experiments on which pet was the better pet. But we've also published scientific research on interactions with pets and subsequent interactions with people. And dogs just make us happier and we treat other people better. So you got to believe the data, right? Dogs at work. It's a big sample.
I recently had Joe Pine on the show, and I know that you've worked with Joe Pine. I've had him on twice now. The first time was about the experience economy. The second time was about transformation. And this was just recently because he's working on his book on transformation. Is transformation a thing? And what I mean by that is transformation something that we know something about in neuroscience?
Thank you for putting that in my terms. I haven't worked with Joe Pine, but he's a friend of mine. And I have told him what I'm going to tell you, which is I am very skeptical about whether organizations should be transforming customers or employees, because I think that guided transformation may not reflect my own personal preferences, right? So Lululemon is an example of a company that seeks to transform their employees. They have lots of employee, essentially counseling and sharing and blah, blah, blah. At least they used to, last I read. It was written up, I think, in HBR. I don't really want to share my personal life. I want to be friends with people I work with, but I think transformation is a very personal issue, and I might get some hints from where I work and what I do. And I think there are organizations that are focused on transformation, but if I'm using a piece of technology, it might make my day better or make my work more efficient. Why should it transform me? So Joe's argument is that it's the highest level of value creation. If you choose to be transformed as a customer, then it is the best and highest use. And I guess it's some small t transformation. Everything we do transforms us. I got a new computer. Well, my day's happier because it's faster and whatever. But have I changed my personality or my focus or my purpose in life? No, I don't think so.
Well, I have a counter argument for that. And the counter argument goes like this. It's not a should question. It's a question of whether anybody wants their work to transform them. And not everybody does. But for some people, they might. And I'm going to give it as an example, you. One does not become a scientist overnight. One starts off with a lot of natural, naive ideas about what is evidence and what is not evidence. And over time and practice and sitting at the feet of principal investigators who have been in this business for a long time, you raise your standards for what is evidence. And you look at the world differently as a result. Now, that's school initially, but it probably doesn't stop the day you finish school. Then you're a postdoc. And you're still raising your ability to understand the world. I'd call that a transformation.
Sure, but I chose to do that. I chose that.
And you chose it, right? And you chose it and you wanted it.
But didn't know what I was getting into, for sure.
Yeah. I've used this quote a lot. A friend of mine I use this with Joe actually. He went to the University of Chicago to be a graduate student in economics, and he wrote back, all I wanted was a library card and they're trying to eat my brain. And what I've always said is that's a great graduate school, right? A great graduate school is more than you expected. So some people look for that in employment.
And I guess we should enable that if you're looking for it.
Yeah, for people who are looking for it.
If it produces an ROI for the employee or the organization, as you said, if it's not too expensive, Having classes, having particularly peer-led classes, I think are a great idea for the class leader and the employees. And then I'm happy to have you do that on the clock for some, couple hours a month or whatever. I think that's smart. And it could be clog dancing. I mean, it doesn't have to be work related if it's personal development. On the other hand, I guess maybe I'm too much of a loner. And I think it's really important to be able to say, work is over and this is you time. I think it's important not to live to work, but to work to live.
Yeah. Essentially, I think we're agreeing. It's because one of the things that happens as you get toward transformation is it becomes more co-created. And the nature of the co-creation is I want this and I'm open to learning in fundamental ways. It's your thing. It's not the company's thing. It's your thing.
You're right. So my example of my friend who went into coaching is a great example of work transforming her for the better, by the way. She was pretty burnt out doing what she was doing, which was managing, software teams. So maybe I'll back off what I said. If it's self-directed and co-created, I'm cool with it. Do you think, though, that companies should invest the resources to facilitate transformation of employees, for example, to facilitate reduced turnover of employees?
Well, so first of all, I help people in my organization transform in the sense that I teach scientific method inside business. So how do you do statistical correlation in such a way that you can actually be raising the bar in terms of what constitutes sufficient evidence? I think that if the company is doing it in a self-serving way, to try to make you into something that serves them, that sounds creepy. That doesn't sound right. But that work is such a big part of life that if I can create a scaffold, and that's probably the right way to think of it, is scaffolding, a scaffold within which you can develop in the way that you want and grow in the way that you want, then that's something not out of bounds.
Yeah, it's a win-win space. I recall the work of Arthur C. Brooks at Harvard Business School, who has written a lot about happiness. And I don't think he did the original research, but cited research showing that there are four components that generate satisfaction with life: faith, family, community, and the fourth is work. And when you are satisfied with the work you're doing, you actually become transformed by that because work is service, essentially, right? So we get to be of service to other people, our colleagues, our customers. And his argument is that capitalism is, I'm paraphrasing, so Arthur, please correct me if I'm wrong, somewhere in the internet. But his argument is that capitalism is amazing because we get to choose, as opposed to being assigned like socialism. I get to choose what I'm doing and I can keep evolving that so that I'm getting, in our word, transformed by the work I do and getting the satisfaction of feeling like I'm valuable. I'm getting paid to do it, so that means I'm creating value for somebody. I think that's an interesting argument that in this decentralized world in which the Western world lives in, we have high life satisfaction because we get so much job satisfaction. And we certainly see that in Americans, say, versus Europeans, where I can't even take 10 days off. It's just, I love what I do so much. And again, maybe I'm delusional, Dart, and this is how we started our conversation. But I have the best job ever for me. It's not the best job for everybody. My kids think I'm insane. They have no idea. If you do like 4 things every day, you have like 4 different jobs. I'm like, yeah, I get to switch all the time. I don't just do one thing all day. I get to like keep switching jobs. I get to talk to interesting people on podcasts. I get to do science. I get to talk to customers. I get to do some coding. I get to do all the things I kind of like doing, which is sort of fun. But they're like, why can't you just do one thing? Like, I don't want to do all those weird things you do and write books. What's wrong with you? There's a pathology probably in there, right? But for me, I get so much life satisfaction from it. So I'd like to enable that for all the people who work with me.
Perfect segue into one of my closing questions, which is, what job do you hire your job to do for you?
Man, I wrote that down when you said that work is the product employers sell to employees. I think that's the way you said it.
Yes. And just the context of that is that because psychology is hard and because product development, we've proven we can do it, let's put the effort on the product development is a part of the reason for that. If I can really understand what you want from this product, I should be able to make it work better for you. Now, I'm asking the utilitarian question, which is not necessarily the joy question, but it's what do you hire it to do for you? Which is a product design question, a product marketing question.
Such a profound question. I don't think off the top of my head I have a great answer. I'd like to think about it. But my first sense is that my best and highest use for the three jobs I have is to be a cheerleader, set direction, and then encourage people to reach their best. And so the three jobs I have are founding a software company, running an academic lab, being a professor, and I do a lot of public speaking. So all three of those cases, my job is to encourage you, to motivate you, to help you focus so that you get to have the best life possible. And while doing that, the organizations I'm representing are also benefiting from your hard work. So for graduate students, it's very hard to do a PhD, as you know, at least intuitively. I say, because I care about you, I want you to get the hell out of my lab. In other words, I'm going to push you hard to do the best you can, probably more than you think you can, because you don't know what your abilities are, because you haven't done this job before, so that you get a great job and have a great life. And I hope we get to be friends for our entire lives, because I spent 5 years seeing you almost every day. It's the same thing I tell my kids: get the hell out of my house so you can thrive on your own. And for employees in my company, I always ask them, what do you want your next job to be? Maybe it's not with me. That's okay. Because I'm invested in you as a human being, not in you as a piece of human capital. So I need to cheerlead everybody, I think.
It's a question I've never asked anybody, but in your case, it's really important, which is when you say that, do you believe you? Because that's a self-reported description.
I think you'd have to ask the people that I help direct their work.
Well, I don't mean that. I mean, is that what you love? If self-reporting is unreliable.
I know, I get it. Yeah. Am I just deluding myself?
You can't know.
Yeah, you never know. I do use the word love a lot with the people that work with me. Not for me, by the way, with me, because they're volunteers. They can work anywhere. I want to make sure they know I love them in the philia sense. I really deeply care about them. I will tell them I love them. If I know them well, not new employees, it's weird. But like people who have worked with me for 10 years, 12 years, you know I love you. I will do anything for you. I'm a huge fan of yours. By the way, this way I used to put my kids to bed this way. Sorry, we're running out of time. But when they're little, I would say, you have to answer 3 questions before I turn out the light. Who loves you best? Who's your number one fan? Who will never, ever leave you? And I needed to hear a dad, dad, dad. But I feel the same thing with employees. I want you to know for your entire life, I'm going to be next to you. I'm going to be by your side. If you don't want me there, I will disappear. But when you call me in, I will help. I will help you find a job. I'll write letters of recommendation. I'll give you advice if you want it. If you don't, that's totally fine too. But I think these people who have invested so much of their emotional labor into helping my organizations deserve to have potentially a lifelong relationship with me, if they're willing. Maybe I've transformed them a teeny bit, Dart.
Yes. So I have a list of ways people answer this, and one of them is to see others shine, to help others to shine. And one of the other responses is to help others, but it's a little bit different. Helping can be a handout, but to see others shine is to kindle that light in them and to help them to pursue that light. I think it's a very specific thing.
And also I think part of that is to let them go. So like you, I have both fired, but also encouraged people to resign many, many times because we have gray hair. And usually they are relieved. Like, I think your time here is done. I just think you've maxed out. You seem frustrated. And I think it's just time for you to move on. I'll pay you for another month or whatever. You can look for a new job. I'm a fan of yours, but you're just not hitting it anymore. And so I think you need to change. And they're like, their shoulders drop and they go, oh yeah, I just need to go.
What does your job cost you?
Sometimes it costs me humility. Sometimes it costs me not dealing with problems. I can be a workaholic and avoid problems with people or things. Certainly, I have companies fail. I've started 4 companies, and I've certainly lost sleep. I've lost weight. COVID, I'm pretty thin, but I lost about 15 pounds during COVID because our company almost went under. I'd like to say my work has made me a better person, but I don't know if that's true. Maybe I'm a worse person. Again, I don't think it's for me to say. I think I'm a more tolerant person. I think my kids have made me nicer. But work, I wish I was a little more empathic and caring. And at work, I think I'm less so than I probably should be.
It was a deep answer on the cost. Very deep answer. Where can people learn more about your work? In particular, Immersion, the book, but in general.
You can go to getimmersion.com, immersion with an I, and on me personally, pauljzak.com. And if you're listening to this, then I'm happy to interact with you. Shoot me an email.
Great. Thank you very much for coming on the show. It was a fantastic, fun conversation.
I feel like it was therapy, Dart. This was so much fun. Thank you.
Thanks for joining me for another episode of Work for Humans. If you enjoyed this episode, please give us a 5-star rating wherever you listen to podcasts. And share the show with one person you think would get value from it. Believe it or not, this really helps us grow the show and reach more people who want to build the kind of work that people really want. As always, thank you to my producer, Jason Ames at Ninth Path Audio for his insights into content and his high standard for quality. Final note, the opinions shared here are my own and not the views of Google or Cisco Systems. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.